Hello, I'm Rav Sha'ul, and today I'll be teaching from the Sabbath Covenant YouTube channel. And before I do, let me use my spiritual weapon and blow a hole in this present darkness that surrounds us and bind the prince of the power of the airwaves so that my message may be heard. Hallelujah. Let the teaching begin.
Hello, this is Rav Sha'ul, and today I'm going to teach on Daniel, and I'm going to show that Daniel based his prophecies of what must take place on earth based on his understanding of the heavenly scroll. What you see before you now is an illustration of, you see Daniel's vision there in the center. You see Ezekiel's over here on the left, and John's over here on the right. Now, I already did the teaching on Ezekiel and John, but I'm going to summarize that real quick, and I'm going to kind of tie it all together so we can see how Yahuwah works and how he reveals his plan of salvation through his prophets and how they agree and how they were all looking at the heavenly scroll. Now, before I continue, I want to, like I said, I want to reveal what the real heavenly scroll proclaims, and I'm going to, it's done in my book. This is the cover of my book. The second edition of Creation Cries Out, the Mazzaroth. It's a 400-page book, restoring back to the Creator his creation, and explaining in detail and describing how the heavenly scroll was corrupted and what it really says, and this information that has been hidden from our view and abolished by the Pope and all that other stuff. It restores back the heavenly scroll. I suggest everyone get a copy of that book so that we all may give glory to Yahuwah, who created the heavenly scroll. Let me get rid of that. All right. This is the heavenly scroll. You see it back there in the background. And all these different signs are pictographs with meaning behind them. And the story begins with Virgo, as Isaiah said, and a virgin shall give birth to a king. And, he was talking about the sign in the sky, the sign of the Son of Man in the sky. So anyway, it begins at Virgo and it ends with Leo, and this is the message actually proclaimed by the Zodiac. Let's just read it because we need to know this. I'm going to refer back to this when I'm explaining John and Revelation, what he was talking about, because we'll see that he literally was teaching the Zodiac the true meaning of it. So let's go. This is the message proclaimed by the stars. Virgo. A virgin will give birth to a beautiful, glorious, and righteous branch. The seed of a woman will be a man of humiliation, to rise to be the desire of nations, and will become exalted, first as shepherd, then as harvester. Libra. The scales demand a price to be paid of this seed. A cross to bear, the victim will be slain and purchase a crown. Scorpio. There's a conflict between the seed and the serpent, leading to a struggle with the enemy. The enemy is vanquished. Sagittarius. The double-natured seed, servant king, triumphs as a warrior and pleases the heavens, builds fires of punishment, casts down the dragon. Capricorn. Eternal life comes from his death. He's the arrow of Yahuwah, and he is pierced, yet springs up again in abundant life. Aquarius. He pours out living water from on high. Humanity drinks of the heavenly river, and the faithful live again. He is the deliverer of the good news, the gospel, carrying the wood of the sacrifice over all the earth. Pisces. The Redeemer's people multiplied, supported and led by the Lamb. The bride is exposed on earth, and the bridegroom is exalted. Aries. The Lamb is found worthy. The bride is made ready. Satan is bound. The strong man triumphs. Taurus. The conquering ruler comes, the sublime vanquished, to execute the great judgment. He is the ruling shepherd king. Gemini. The marriage of the Lamb, the enemy is trodden down. The prince comes in great glory. Cancer. The great bride, the two houses of Judah and Israel are reunited. They are brought safely into the kingdom. Leo. The Lion King is aroused for rendering. The serpent flees. The bowl of wrath is upon him, and his carcass is devoured. The Lion of the tribe of Judah rules as king. That is what the heavens truly proclaim. as told in the Zodiac by the 12 signs, which are pictographs. Okay, now with the content of the heavenly scroll in mind, I will explain in the text as we read it and reference the pictographs or the constellations to demonstrate what the prophet Daniel beheld when he looked up at the heavenly scroll. We see that the prophet Daniel based his predictions on the heavenly scroll, describing the Son of Man Orion, just like John did, as he would witness what the scroll said about the glory of Yahuwah, which is Yahusha. In Daniel chapter 7, he describes the Enoch Zodiac in detail and then describes the constellation Orion as the Son of Man. So let me just read through this and then we'll get to breaking it down. Daniel 7, in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions in his mind as he studied the heavenly scroll of Enoch, as he lay on his bed, looking up at the stars and the constellations. Then he wrote down his dream. Now, dream here, we're always told that he was asleep. No, he was laying on his bed looking up at the stars. The word dream here is H2493 in Strong's, and it means a revelation from Yahuwah. So he was not asleep. He was wide awake, writing down his visions. And he continues, beginning the account of these matters, Daniel spoke and said, I saw the heavenly scroll in my vision by night because he was observing the stars, and they come out at night. So he's laying on his bed at night looking up at the scroll. And behold, he says, the heavenly scroll. I beheld the Enoch Zodiac until the 4 thrones were set in place. That's the 4 living creatures on the outer rim of the Enoch Zodiac that move it about until they had moved the heavenly scroll into position. And the Ancient of Days, which is Yahuwah, did sit on the judgment seat, as we'll see, whose vesture was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was like the fiery flame, and his wheels, and here we go with wheels again. This is the 4 wheels within a wheel that Ezekiel described. I'm going to show all this when we get to the illustration. And his wheels is burning fire. A fiery stream issued from his mouth and came forth from before him. His words are like an all-consuming fire. See Jeremiah 23:29 and Hebrews 12:29. Thousands upon thousands of stars in the heavens. He was looking at all the stars up there surrounding the throne. Ministered to him, and 10,000 times 10,000s of stars, the same thing John said, stood before him. Daniel was looking at the heavenly scroll and all the stars in the heavens. The judgment seat was set, or rather, the judge Yahuwah had taken his seat. The battle is about to begin between the Son of Man and the Son of Perdition, as I'm going to show. And the books of the heavenly scroll, there are actually 3. I have 4 there. There are 3 books, as I revealed in Creation Cries Out, and we're going to go look at that. I'm going to explain that too. We're open. So he looks up at the heavenly scroll, and the books were opened. Okay, so Daniel continues. He said, I beheld, he's talking about the heavenly scroll, then because of the voice of the great words, which the horn, now horn here is, don't get that confused with the other horns in Daniel. This is Strong's H7162. It's a musical instrument. It should have been translated shofar, because we know that Yahuwah's voice sounds like a loud shofar blast. Hebrews 12:19. So like I said, let's not get that confused. So, which the horn spoke, Yahuwah. I beheld what is written in the heavenly scroll until the beast was slain and his body destroyed and given to the burning flame. Now, he's describing the pictograph of Sagittarius. Remember, let's go look at it. Sagittarius, right over here, says the double nature seed, servant king, triumphs as warrior and pleases the heavens, builds fires of punishment, and casts down the dragon. That's what he's talking about right there when he says, I beheld in the heavenly scroll. He was beholding the pictograph of Sagittarius, and he was literally giving us the meaning of it. So I beheld Sagittarius until the beast was slain and his body destroyed and given to the burning flame. He continues, verse 12, as concerning the rest of the beasts, they had their governments taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. That's the message behind the pictograph of Taurus. Let's go see what Taurus has to say. Right here. Taurus. The conquering ruler comes, the sublime vanquisher, to execute the great judgment. He is the ruling shepherd king. Okay, so he comes and he strips everybody of their kingdom and he executes judgment. That's verse 13. That's verse 12. Verse 13. I saw in the night sky visions of the heavenly scroll. Like I said, he was laying down at night looking at the stars. And behold, the constellation Orion. So now he beholds Orion, and he recognizes that as a physical to spiritual parallel, or a pictograph of the Son of Man, the Messiah. So he says, in verse 13, I saw in the night sky visions of the heavenly scroll, and behold, the constellation Orion, one that looks like the Son of Man, came with the clouds of heaven, which are the Milky Way. We see this here. This is what it looks like. The constellation Orion is up there in the sky, and he's right next to the Milky Way, which looks like clouds in heaven. So just like I explained, and when I was talking about Revelation, all the prophets who looked up in the sky recognized the heavenly scroll was speaking of the Messiah, who was represented in the heavens by Orion riding on the clouds of heaven. And he continues, Yahusha and the beast, or the Son of Man and the beast, came to the Ancient of Days, which is Yahuwah, who had taken his seat to judge between them. Remember, we talked about that earlier in this chapter. And they both were brought together before Yahuwah, because Yahuwah is about to declare who was the fulfillment of the heavenly scroll. Remember, Yahuwah took his seat, and the books were opened. Okay, so he's going to read the books, and he's going to award one of them a kingdom, and the other one will be destroyed. Verse 14, and there was given him, the Son of Man, in context. Remember, that's who John said he was looking at. It was given him, the Son of Man, ruling authority and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should obey him. His government is an everlasting government which will not pass away, and his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed. And he's describing the pictograph of Leo, which was the last sign that Yahusha had to fulfill. You can see it down here. Leo, the Lion King, is aroused for rendering. The serpent flees, the bowl of wrath is upon him, and his carcass is devoured. The Lion of the tribe of Judah rules as king. So Daniel was basically describing the contents of the heavenly scroll, just like Yochanan or John did in the book of Revelation. Okay, so he goes on to say in verse 15, he says, I, Daniel, was grieved in my spirit within my body, and the visions of the heavenly scroll he was looking at, that passed through my mind as he studied Enoch Zodiac, he wasn't sleeping, troubled me as he lay on his bed at night, looking up at the stars. He was not dreaming. He was writing these things down as Yahuwah gave him understanding, as he said in verse 1. He said he was writing these things down as he got the revelation. So verse 16, Daniel continues, I came near to one of those who stood by and asked him the truth of this. In other words, he was asking, what do these constellations mean that I'm looking at? So he told me and revealed the interpretation of these things to me. So he revealed the meaning behind the heavenly pictographs to Daniel. Okay, that's just an introduction. Daniel then goes on from there to reveal what he was shown concerning the heavenly scroll. So the book of Daniel, just like the book of Revelation, is a detailed explanation and accounting of the heavenly scroll, specifically as it relates to the Son of Man. Both of them were describing the Son of Man, as I showed, as portrayed by the constellation Orion. These books describe how the contents of this scroll play out in the course of human history, as the constellations are pictographs, they're physical to spiritual parallels. Orion represents the Son of Man, of whom the heavenly scroll speaks. Yahusha is the fulfillment of that scroll. We must have this foundation of the heavenly scroll if we're going to properly interpret these prophetic books. The book of Daniel is revealing what the heavenly scroll says about the events from his time period coming out of exile through the first coming of the Son of Man in the clouds of heaven. Every event in the book of Daniel has been fulfilled in great detail prior to the first coming of the Messiah. And the book of Daniel ends when the Messiah was cut off. Then the book of Revelation picks up, and John covers the period of time from when the Messiah was cut off until the time he returns, the age of Pisces. Okay, we saw in Daniel there that the books, plural, of the heavenly scroll were opened. What I want to do is show in my book, Creation Cries Out. This is it right here. I teach those books, and I explain how the heavenly scroll is literally laid out into 3 books with 4 chapters each. Let me go over there and we'll take a look at that. Okay, here it is, and how to read the heavenly scroll. let me just explain a little bit. In my book, I explain, how you read the heavenly scroll. And what I do is I go in and show that here's the heavenly scroll. There's 12 major signs, and each sign has 3 associated deacons, which are smaller constellations around it. So to understand what the major sign means and what the story it tells, you have to read what the 3 stories of these deacons tell. And you find that out by understanding the meaning of their names. The names have meaning. So you look at the names and the stars and these smaller deacons, and that tells you what the deacon is saying. And then you string the deacons together, and that gives you the story behind the major sign. So that's how you read the Heavenly Scroll. And the Heavenly Scroll is broken up into 3 books with 4 chapters. It begins at Virgo, and that's Book 1, Chapter 1. Then it goes to Libra, which is Chapter 2 of Book 1. Then it goes to Scorpio, which is Chapter 3 of Book 1. And then it goes to Sagittarius, which is Chapter 4 of Book 1. And you notice, in each one of these, I go in and define what the star names are and what those names mean. And then I talk about the 3 associated deacons. And then I give you the full story of that sign of Sagittarius. And then we go to Chapter 1 of Book 2. And it goes on and on and on. So you get through 3 books with 4 chapters each. Okay, what we're going to do is, what you're looking at here is I'm bringing up an overall illustration with the 3 prophecies that I've dealt with so far, the Ezekiel's vision and John's vision and Daniel's vision here in the center. And I'm going to show how Yahuwah works, and how you got to kind of have to know all the prophets, to understand any one of them, because they all further elaborate, and he gives, knowledge to this one and not that one, and, but the other one references something that the other one explains. So to show how the prophets fit together, I brought them all up here so we can take a look. And Daniel's vision is a vision of the judgment seat, as we read. And so what I did right here is I went in to Daniel 7, verse 1 through 10, and see all the little passages here that I highlighted and read and underlined. I took all those out because we're going to deal with those, and I put them all together over here, right here. So we're going to deal with them. And then I'm going to show how this works. So in Daniel 7:9, he says, I beheld, and he's talking about the Enoch Zodiac or the Heavenly Scroll, until the 4 thrones were set in place. Or what it should read is the 4 thrones set it in place, because it goes on to say that what they were sitting in place was the throne of Yahuwah. So let's go look at these 4 thrones and what he really means there. He's talking about the same thing that both John and Ezekiel described. And we'll go look at that. And he's talking about the 4 cardinal points of the zodiac. We see this in Revelation 4:7. He says, and the first creature was like that. Hang on, let me get my pointer so I can do some teaching over here. All right. He said, and the first creature was like a lion. There it is, Leo, the lion of tribe of Judah. And I explained all this in my presentation on the book of Revelation. So if you want a full breakdown, go watch that video. He says, and the second creature was like that of a calf or a bull or a cow, whatever you want to say, or an ox. That's Ephraim and Taurus. And he said, and then the third creature was like a man. That's Reuben, which is Aquarius, the man, the water bearer. And the fourth creature was like a flying eagle. And there he is. He's talking about Dan. And Scorpio, it could be a scorpion or an eagle. I explain all that, like I said, in my presentation on the book of Revelation and the Heavenly Scroll. But Ezekiel talked about the same thing. In Ezekiel 1:10, he said their faces look like this. Each of them had 4 faces of a human being. There's the man. Face of a lion. There it is. Let's see, the face of an ox. There it is. And also the face of an eagle. There it is. And, so what both of the prophets were given was a vision, of the heavenly scroll that Enoch illustrated like this. Let me zoom in on it, get a little better look at it. Enoch, this is how he showed it. And so they all witnessed the same thing. Some of them described it with words, and Enoch actually drew it. So I'm just illustrating that they all were talking about the same thing, the four cardinal points, which Ezekiel described as, where'd my pointer go? Ezekiel described as four living beings, on the outside of the scroll that move the scroll about. Okay, so now we're going to, let's look a little bit at just kind of as review, what John said in the book of Revelation is, as he actually confirmed the message in the heavenly scroll. Is you need to go watch that video. I mean, he broke it down and talked about all the different signs and what they meant, and as Yahuwah had given Revelation. But anyway, we see here that in Revelation chapter 4, verse 2, we have, and immediately I was in the Spirit, and behold, a throne was set in the heavenly scroll. Well, here's the heavenly scroll, and there's a throne set in the heavenly scroll right there. Now, I broke the throne up, or blew it up anyway. It's right there. So let's look at what else he said. He said, and there was a rainbow surrounding the throne. There's Enoch illustrated the rainbow throne there. And he said, surrounding the throne were 24 seats, and sitting on the seats I saw 24 elders. And down here he said the 24 elders were falling before the throne. I explained all this in my presentation on the book of Revelation, but the way Enoch illustrated that was stars, and we went in that video and we counted every one of these stars, and there's exactly 24 of them. John saw them as elders, and you can see they're all falling before the throne. Most of them already fell. The rest of them are kind of in the process down there of falling. So anyway, what else did John say? He said, and surrounding the throne were four living creatures full of eyes before and behind. And the four living creatures, and we talked about that already. That's what I did down here, and he talks about the four living creatures. And he also went on to say they were full of eyes all around and within. And so he was talking about the third wheel of Ezekiel, which is this thing. It's the wheel with all the signs, and each one of them has two eyes. There's 24 eyes all around, just like he said, and just like Ezekiel said. Both of them described the same thing. Both of them said it was full of eyes all around. But anyway, that's the third wheel of Ezekiel. And then John goes on to say that, these four beasts before the throne were singing, holy, 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 Father Yahuwah Almighty, all the time. And here we go, the four beasts, we got their mouth open singing, holy, holy, holy. All this is described in my video on the book of Revelation, and also in my video on the book of Ezekiel. So let's go over here, and I want to show how the heavenly scroll is being moved into place. Okay, so what I'm going to do is let's go over here and we just looked at John's revelation of these things, and now we're going to go look at Ezekiel's, and we're going to look at the heavenly scroll and the four wheels within a wheel. Now, I describe all this in my video on Ezekiel's four wheel within a wheel and prove all of this. I'm not going to get into too much detail here, but what I did is I broke up the heavenly scroll and showed the four wheels. There's wheel number one, which is the rim with the four creatures that move the wheel, the entire thing about. And then there's the wheel number two, which is the frame, and wheel number three, which is, wheels were full of eyes all around, which is the signs wheel or the eyes wheel. Let me zoom in here a little bit more so we can see it. All right. And that's that wheel. And then there was the throne wheel that Ezekiel described in great detail. He said from, high above on the throne was the appearance of a man. There's the man. Let me zoom in on it even more. So he said, high above the throne was the appearance of a man. There's the man. And from his waist up was the appearance of fire. There's the fire around his head. And from the waist down looked like a rainbow, just like John had said and Enoch had illustrated. So, we're talking about very detailed descriptions. All the prophets were looking at the same thing. But what we're going to do is we're going to reassemble this wheel. Let's put it back together. Let me move my arrow out of the way. All right, let's put it back together. Let's put the frame back inside the rim. There we go. And let's put the That was wheel number 2 inside wheel number 1, and now we're going to put wheel number 3 back inside those 2 wheels. There we go. And then we're going to put wheel number 4, which is the throne room, back inside of it. And there you go. We have the Enoch Zodiac. Now, what we're going to do now is we're going to talk about the judgment seat. So like I said, they were all looking at the same thing. You know, he was talking about the 4 thrones, you know, set it in place, which was the main throne of Yahuwah. And then Yahuwah took his seat, you know. So anyway, and we described all what those 4 thrones were that Daniel saw were the 4 cardinal points, and the 4 living creatures or beasts that Daniel and John saw. So anyway, according to Ezekiel, these 4 living creatures on the outer rim move the heavenly scroll around. You know, so that's what he's talking about. He said the 4 thrones were set in place, or the 4 thrones set Yahuwah's throne into place. So let's just set it into place. There it goes. Got the 4 beasts. Move it over here and put it in place. I'll make this a little bigger so we can all see it. Okay. Oops. Distorted it. All right, here we go. Okay, so here it is. This is Daniel's vision. It's the judgment seat. So he starts out with the 4 thrones set the seat in place, and that's what they did. And his throne was like a fiery flame, and his wheels. Well, I just showed you what that was talking about. You know, Daniel doesn't really explain it. He just says his wheels. But if we look at Scripture as a whole and Yahuwah's revelation to Ezekiel, we know exactly what he was talking about. And I just showed those wheels were all moved into place, and Yahuwah takes his seat to issue judgment. You know, and then he goes on to say that the books of the heavenly scroll were opened. And we looked at the books. I explained that in my book, Creation Cries Out. There's 3 books in the heavenly scroll, each with 4 chapters. Very much like in the earthly scroll, there's, you know, excess of 70-something books. And the earthly scroll. So the heavenly scroll is no different. There are books in that scroll. This has been Rav Sha'ul, a presentation of the Sabbath Covenant. You've been listening to A Nazarene Perspective. Hallelujah. I encourage everyone to rediscover the heavenly scroll, the original revelation from the Creator to all mankind. I restore this vital revelation in my book, Creation Cries Out, 2nd edition, The Mazzaroth, on Amazon Books in print and Kindle, and on the book patch, $10 for the full color PDF.